Cubewalker Lithus looks simple at first. We expected a slow, stagger-heavy fight. This boss turned into one of the most interesting examples of how arena design can completely change the feel of an encounter. Today, we're breaking down Lithus mechanics, readability, stagger system, weak point design, range pressure, and whether this fight becomes more rewarding after learning it. The fight takes place deep inside a cramped mining corridor surrounded by scaffolding, rock walls, and very little room to disengage. Like many large construct-style bosses, Lithus opens with slow, heavy melee attacks designed around obvious telegraphs, leaving generous punish windows that encourage aggressive play. His overhead slam has an extremely large startup animation, which gives you plenty of time to commit to melee pressure before dodge rolling out safely. Early on, the fight feels almost too easy. Within the first 2 attack rotations, we already filled his stagger gauge. When Lithus staggers, his body collapses into scattered stone fragments and exposes his glowing cube core. This mechanic isn't entirely clear. My first instinct was actually to grab the cube and try to carry it away like other environmental Axom objects found throughout Crimson Desert. But the interaction raised a more interesting question. What happens if we try pulling the cube directly out of Lithus? This is where the fight suddenly changed for me. Pulling Lithus' core out immediately transitions him into his spinning disassembly attack, a whirlwind-like phase where massive stone chunks get tossed around and crash throughout the arena. And on hard difficulty, this attack hits incredibly hard. Up until this point, we had barely taken damage the entire encounter. Then suddenly, 2 rotating rock hits immediately killed Cliff. That abrupt shift completely changed how I viewed the fight. What makes this moment especially interesting is how the arena design amplifies the danger. The Southern Quarry looks visually massive, but the actual combat space is surprisingly restricted. Between the narrow corridor layout, environmental collision, there's very little room to create safe positioning once the debris phase begins. That creates an unusual tension in the encounter. The debris phase also became much more readable over time. The falling rock impacts are clearly telegraphed through the dark ground indicators. Once the final debris pattern finishes, Lithus consistently follows up with the full corridor shockwave attack. The shockwave ended up becoming one of the more satisfying mechanics in the fight. The timing is strict, but once learned, dodge rolling or forward step evading through the attack using iframes feels extremely rewarding. One detail I actually liked during the stagger states was how Lithus' shattered body fragments remain physical objects in the arena. Instead of turning the stagger into completely free damage phase, the scattered debris creates a brief moment of tension where you're trying to locate the exposed core, maneuver around the arena, and maximize damage before the stagger gauge resets and Lithus resumes attacking. It's a small detail, but it helps the stagger mechanic feel more dynamic than a traditional knockdown window. You can also really start to feel how much the Southern Quarry itself shapes this encounter during the later attempts. The arena isn't a clean rectangular combat space. Large mining rock formations interrupt the corridor throughout the battlefield, creating awkward pathing during the whirlwind and debris phases. The environmental clutter adds pressure to the encounter. It can also occasionally make the fight feel more restrictive than challenging, especially when Lithus chains whirlwind attacks near tighter sections of the arena. At this point, we understand the core rhythm of the encounter. Stay aggressive during his slower melee strings, build stagger quickly, punish the exposed core whenever possible, and create enough spacing to survive the debris phase safely. Final verdict. Learning the stagger timings, understanding the debris phases, and adapting to the restrictive quarry layout, where does Cubewalker Lithus actually land? Mechanically, the fight feels average. The telegraphs are readable, the punish windows are generous, the stagger system is easy to exploit, and once you understand the flow of the encounter, Lithus spends a surprising amount of time inviting the player to overwhelm him with aggression. That creates an interesting problem. The fight builds stagger extremely quickly, allowing repeated core exposure phases that dramatically shorten the encounter instead of deepening it mechanically. And while the core interaction initially feels unique, the fight never really evolves beyond that idea. In terms of impact, the encounter also feels strangely disconnected from the world around it. I actually had more fun fighting through the quarry leading up to Lithus than the boss encounter itself. The reward also felt underwhelming, especially considering it unlocks a weapon for a secondary character we haven't even seen for nearly the entire game. And what really stood out to me was how little the world reacts to the fight afterward. You can literally see normal enemies immediately return and continue attacking as if this massive construct battle never even happened. Fairness-wise, the fight is mostly solid. Attacks are readable, timings are learnable, and the encounter rarely feels outright cheap. but almost all the real damage comes from the environmental restriction. The narrow quarry corridor amplifies debris phases, shockwave pressure, and whirlwind attack far more than Lithus' actual moveset does. And honestly, arena design is probably the most memorable part of the encounter. Without the restrictive quarry layout, Lithus would likely become extremely easy to exploit or outright cheese, which you can already see happening in some player strategies that abuse the out-of-bounds edges of the arena to completely avoid the debris mechanics. That means the arena itself feels like the real boss fight. And while that creates tension, it also exposes how limited Lithus' actual combat depth really is. Replayability is where the encounter ultimately falls short for me. Even after learning the mechanics, understanding the spacing, and adapting to the debris phases, the fight never becomes satisfying to replay. There is some enjoyment in mastering the arena pressure, but mechanically, Lithus simply does not evolve enough to make repeated fights feel rewarding. And for this channel, replayability matters. Because a boss doesn't earn our worth the next stamp just for having a good idea, it earns the stamp when learning the encounter makes you genuinely want to come back and fight it again and again. So I'm sorry, Lithus, even with one of the more interesting arena concepts we've seen so far in Crimson Desert, you are not worth the next fight. When you think back on this encounter, are you remembering Lithus or the arena? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you to everyone who stayed with me until the end of the fight. I genuinely appreciate it. If you enjoyed this style of boss encounter analysis and want to see more videos like this, let me know by subscribing and liking the video, as it really helps support the channel. This is still a new channel and I'm actively learning and improving with every single video. A lot of what shapes this channel moving forward will come directly from the community in understanding what's working, what isn't, and which encounters are worth revisiting together. Until the next fight.